Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video I'd like to continue to help students making their first reading through Aristotle's work on interpretation. As you can see on the screen here, we're moving on to Chapter 4 of On Interpretation, and the topic of Chapter 4, again, as you can see there in the text, is the sentence. So in our first 3 lessons on interpretation, we've looked at the first chapter, which was sort of an overview of the study. We talked about what we studied in the categories, the first book of Aristotle's Organon. We said how in the categories we talked about simple ideas and how they're represented in speech with words. We talked about the 10 categories into which Aristotle divides things that can be spoken. And in On Interpretation, we move on from those simple ideas and simple expressions, disconnected parts. We move on to the operation of the mind whereby we join those simple parts together, the process which is called judgment, to form a certain kind of sentence which is significant and which is used in the art of reasoning, which is enunciative speech. So we've looked at the categories. Like I said, we've gotten into the first 3 chapters of On Interpretation, where we're going to study enunciative speech. And we've looked at the definition of the parts, the 2 principal parts of speech, the noun in Chapter 2 and the verb in Chapter 3. Now we're going to start moving towards their composition, putting them together by means of judgment, which is one of the operations of the mind, to form sentences. And then to look, once we establish sentences, to understand that there is a certain kind or species of sentence that interests us in reasoning, and we're going to talk about that here in Chapter 4. One thing that I'd like to point out before we get started here, just so that you're aware of this. I don't know if anyone studying this course in classical reasoning is simultaneously studying Greek reading and Greek grammar. I hope that you are, because eventually access to the original Greek text of Aristotle's works is always very helpful and removes a lot of confusion from the study. So I encourage students to do that, to take up the study of Greek so that you can read Aristotle's works directly, because as we'll see, these translations are helpful 90% of the time, but 10% of the time they leave us with some interpretive confusion and problems to sort out, and we're going to see that here in this lesson. But in this chapter, Chapter 4, I just want you to know that the Greek word that is translated sentence here is the Greek word logos. So again, if you're studying Greek reading and you get into the Gospel of St. John, and right in the beginning of the Gospel of St. John we read en arche ein hologos, logos. That word logos is the Greek word for sentence here. It can also be translated as speech. So a sentence or speech is a translation of the Greek word logos, which I think is worth keeping in mind. As far as in the last chapter, the word verb, the Greek original word that's translated verb is chrema, which in Latin would be verbum, but it's confusing because logos, as you know, is also translated verbum in Latin. So there's confusion. There can be confusion in this translation work, and that's why it's always ideal for any student who is serious about the study of classical philosophy or Catholic theology. It's always ideal to study, to give yourself access to the original languages, because these dilemmas in interpretation and translation can be eliminated by just getting right to the original language. So I just wanted to say that to encourage you to pursue the study of Greek as you continue in reading Aristotle's works. And English translation, They should be considered a help and a convenience, but as we'll see, there's a lot of confusion that emerges in translation, which is why translation is sometimes dangerous. But let's get into chapter 4 and see what Aristotle has to say about a sentence. We start off, just as we did in chapters 2 and 3, we start off with the definition of the term that we'll be studying. We read here, a sentence is voice significant according to compact, of which a certain part is significant considered separately. Let me read that again. A sentence is voice significant according to compact, of which a certain part is significant considered separately. So when we look at the definition of a sentence, we find that sentence or speech has something in common with nouns and verbs, and then there's something that distinguishes the sentence from nouns and verbs. In the first part of the definition, we read, a sentence is voice significant according to compact. A sentence is voice significant according to compact. In this, a sentence is like a noun or a verb, because a noun and a verb are individually, they are a voice significant according to compact. So a sentence is like a noun and like a verb in that it is voice or spoken sound that is significant according to compact, right? But a sentence differs from those because a certain part of a sentence is significant when considered by itself. The noun and the verb are simple parts of speech. They signify simple ideas. The sentence is a compound or composite idea. We're putting together simple parts of speech to form compound speech, which is what a sentence is. So if we divide a sentence into parts, we'll find that a part of a sentence or a part of speech can be significant by itself. And what that means is a part of a sentence can be used by the speaker to signify an idea by itself. So a part of speech of which a sentence is composed can be significant by itself separately. This is not true of words. This is not true of a noun or of a verb, but it is true of a sentence. So the simple parts of speech are different from the compound speech because the compound speech is made up of or composed of simple parts that do signify by themselves, that are used to signify simple ideas by themselves. So we see how a sentence is like to a noun and a verb, and we see what distinguishes the sentence from the noun and the verb. They're similar in that a sentence, noun, and verb are all voice significant according to compact. And if you want to, if you still don't understand what that means, go back and review those lessons. You've got to understand those lessons before we move forward. What's different about speech, or what makes speech unique and of interest to us, is that it is composed, it's composite, it's made up of simple parts that do signify separately. Okay, so we have there a definition, a working definition of a sentence. A sentence is voice significant according to compact, of which a certain part is significant considered separately. Okay, now when we move on in this chapter, this is why I talked about the trouble that translation can give us. The reading of this first 2 or 3 sentences can be very confusing. And the reason why is because in the second sentence here, we read, it signifies indeed as a word, but not as affirmation or negation. And it starts with the pronoun it. And based on the first sentence, we don't know what it is referring to. A sentence is voice significant according to compact, of which a certain part is significant considered separately. It signifies, but what does it refer to? Does it refer back to the sentence, or does it refer to a certain part? And the answer is it refers back to a certain part. And that's a little bit of confusion caused by our translation that can cause you some difficulty in reading these first few lines. And they're important, so let's make sure we understand it. So when he refers back and says, a certain part is significant considered separately, it signifies as a word, but not as affirmation or negation. Okay, so the part of a sentence which is significant as a word, that is, as a simple sign or symbol of an idea. All right, so the part of a sentence is significant as a word. But the part of a sentence, no part of the sentence signifies affirmation or negation. Okay, that's what he's saying there in that second sentence. So the part of a sentence which is significant by itself signifies as a word, as a simple sign of a simple idea. But no part of a sentence expresses affirmation or negation. The entire sentence will express affirmation or negation, but no part of the sentence will express affirmation or negation. To move on here, he says, but I say, as for instance, the word man signifies something by itself. The word man signifies something by itself, but it doesn't express that it is or is not. It doesn't affirm or deny. It doesn't express affirmation or negation, but it does signify something by itself. The word man signifies something by itself, but it doesn't express affirmation or negation. Okay, so that third sentence helps us to understand the meaning of the second sentence. All right, the third sentence provides an example of what is stated in the second sentence. So don't let that confuse you. Make sure you read it in the right way. Let the third sentence make clear the meaning of the second sentence. All right. So man, the word man, which would be a part of a sentence, can signify something by itself, but does not signify any affirmation or negation. Signifies something, but not that it is or is not. It will be, however, affirmation or negation if anything is added to it. The word man can express affirmation or negation if something is added to it, namely a verb. Okay? So the part of a sentence can express affirmation or negation when it's joined to another part of speech to form a sentence. He goes on here to say, but one syllable of the word anthropos, which is just the Greek word for man, anthropos, one syllable of the word is not significant by itself. And he gives us another example here. For neither in the word mus, which is the Greek word for mouse, is the, we could say syllable us significant, but it is now sound, articulate alone. It is sound, but it's not significant sound. That's true for us in the word mus. A part of the word is not significant in itself. That's also true for any of the syllables of the word anthropos. The parts of a word are not significant in themselves, whereas the parts of a sentence are significant in themselves. He goes on to say, in double words, however, in double words, and in English we would refer to these as compound words. In double words, so if we take a compound word where a word is actually composed of two parts, and those parts do, or I should say, can express an idea by themselves, but they don't because they're used as a single word to signify a single idea. In double words, a part signifies indeed something, but not by itself, as we have observed in the previous lessons. So here in chapter 4, as he gets started, he provides a review of this concept that we've talked about in the previous chapters, of what it means for a part of a word, like a noun or a verb, to signify separately. You see, he's adding information here in chapter 4 that actually unfolds the meaning of what he was talking about in chapters 2 or 3. Plus, he introduces the definition of the sentence and explains that in a sentence, a certain part is significant, considered separately. And now we understand why he took time in chapters 2 and 3 to define the noun and the verb, because they're the simple parts of the sentence. And that's why I keep saying, don't get overwhelmed or frustrated if you read a chapter and feel like you can't get everything, because in a future chapter, more information is going to be added and the meaning is going to be unfolded. That's how the study of Aristotle's works works. So this is a good example of that. Now that you see the definition of a sentence, you can understand exactly what he was talking about when he talked about how a part of a noun has no significance by itself. Well, who cares? Who cares if a part of a word has no meaning by itself? Well, why is that important? Because this is what distinguishes a word from speech. A sentence or speech does have significant parts. It's composed of significant parts. A word is not composed of significant parts. All right, so that is important for us now because we see that a sentence, being compound speech, is composed of simple parts or elements which have no significance in their parts. Okay? So that's the point here. A sentence is voice significant according to compact, of which a certain part is significant, considered separately. Then we have a few sentences where he goes on and explains how words do not signify things in their parts, but how sentences do. So that should be clear now. And also in double words or compound words, it may be a little confusing because you could say, well, wait a minute. And I used the example of the word hot dog back in chapter 2. You may say, wait a minute. It doesn't seem like it's true what Aristotle's saying because hot is a part of hot dog, and that has meaning by itself. And dog is a part of hot dog, and that seems to have meaning by itself. So what's he talking about? Well, as I explained back in chapter 2, the person who says the word hot dog does not intend for the individual parts, hot and dog, to be heard or interpreted by themselves. He's simply giving the name of a thing. He has in his mind the idea of a hot dog. And the name hot dog, even though it can be divided into parts, is not intended to be divided into parts and is not intended for those parts to be signs of any ideas. The word is simple. The idea is simple. Even though the word itself is composed of what could be two separate words, it's not intended to be understood as two separate words. Okay, so that may be a little tricky to understand, but if you just chew on it a bit, I think you'll see what he's saying, and you can move on with this. So he goes on to say, but every sentence is significant not as an instrument, but as we have said, according to compact. Every sentence is significant not as an instrument, but as we have said, according to compact. Now, this sentence here may be difficult for you to understand because we have this word instrument brought in. And what you may be tempted to do, and it's fine for you to do this if you understand what you're doing, you may be tempted to grab a dictionary and look up the word instrument. And then you'll see a bunch of different definitions for instrument, and you'll pick one and insert the meaning into the text. And you shouldn't do that, all right? When you study philosophy or theology, when you study these sciences, and we're studying in translation, if you come across a word whose meaning you don't know, you should not run to a dictionary, because the dictionary may offer one or more possible meanings for a word based on how that word has been used in history, but that doesn't prove that it's the meaning of that word in this sentence, in this author, for example. This translation was done by Thomas Taylor. He translated this in the 1830s. It's very possible, and in many places we see this, not many, some places we see this, where he uses an English word in a way that it was used in the 1830s, which is different from the way we use that word today. So even though this is an English translation, there still can be some confusion in the translation. The best thing to do, and this is a learning skill that you really need to develop to become a good student, you need to learn to let the context define the words that you read. And very often, this can be done. Let the context, let the passage define for you the word that you don't understand. So let's use this as an example here. Every sentence is significant not as an instrument. So let's say you don't know what the word instrument is, because you don't at this point. Every sentence is significant not as an instrument, but according to compact. So every sentence is significant according to compact. Okay, that's simple. We understand that. We've explained that and studied that in previous chapters. According to compact means it's artificial. It's established by man. We determine the meanings of words. And so a sentence is significant not because it has some natural or necessary meaning, but because we, by defining terms, by pointing to and naming things and agreeing on our speech with other men, which we learn, that's the point of education, to learn the conventions so that we can enter into communication with other men using language. It's established by convention. It's significant by convention. If you don't learn, you won't understand the meaning of a sentence. But when you do learn, then you become aware of the meaning of speech. It's significant according to compact, not as an instrument. Okay, so what does this word instrument mean? How can we use the context to figure out the meaning of this word? Well, very simply, it's the opposite of being significant according to compact. We see it's significant not as an instrument, but according to compact. So according to compact is the opposite of as an instrument. And as I've explained, according to compact means not according to nature. And therefore, a sentence is significant not as an instrument or some natural instrument or natural power, not as a natural instrument or some kind of instrument of nature, but, as we have said, according to compact. So you can see how the context can help you understand what's being said there. Now, what's helpful in this sentence is it doesn't even matter what not as an instrument means, because that's not part of the definition of the sentence. Every sentence is significant according to compact. So this is simply an explanation of part of the definition of a sentence. All right, let's keep going. Every sentence is significant according to compact. every sentence is significant. Not every sentence, however, is enunciative. Not every sentence is enunciative. So we see that an enunciative sentence is one kind of sentence, and there are other kinds of sentences. So sentence, if you've studied Porphyry, is a genus, and enunciative is a species of the genus sentence. Enunciative speech or an enunciative sentence is a kind of sentence. Not every sentence is enunciative, but that in which truth or falsehood is inherent. So an enunciative sentence is a sentence in which truth or falsehood is inherent. So we have here a definition of enunciative speech or an enunciative sentence. Not every sentence is enunciative, but an enunciative sentence is one in which truth or falsehood is inherent, and we talked about this in a previous lesson. And he goes on to discuss this here. He says, but these are not inherent in every sentence. Affirmation and negation are not inherent in every sentence, but only in some sentences, and we call those sentences enunciative sentences. So what we're doing here in chapter 4 is we're getting to the point, we're getting to the focus or the topic on interpretation, which is the study of enunciative speech. We're getting there. We started with the parts, we learned about a noun, we learned about a verb, we then learned about how nouns and verbs are compounded to form sentences, and this is an operation of the mind. These simple ideas are joined together in our minds, and when we articulate that, we have a sentence or speech. But not everything that we say as speech, not every kind of sentence is the kind that we're interested in reasoning. But some of them are, because some of them have truth or falsehood inherent in them. Those are the sentences in reasoning that we're interested in. And he goes on to say, thus, for instance, a prayer is a sentence, but it is neither true nor false. So a prayer would be a kind of sentence, but truth and falsehood is not inherent in a prayer. If I say, Lord, please help me to be holy, that's not true or false. It is a sentence, but it has no truth or falsehood in it. A prayer, as an example, is a sentence, but is neither true nor false. The consideration, therefore, of other sentences must be omitted. So any other kind of sentence, anything other than an enunciative sentence must be omitted. They have nothing to do with the art and science of reasoning. So we're zeroing in on one kind of sentence, which is the only kind of sentence that we're interested in reasoning, and it's the enunciative sentence, a sentence in which truth or falsehood is inherent. It's either true or false. And there's only one kind of sentence that, as soon as it comes out of our mouth, is either true or false, and that's enunciative speech. The consideration of other sentences must be omitted because they are more adapted to rhetoric or poetry. So these other kinds of sentences, like prayers, commands, wishes, things like that, those are to be considered in the study of rhetoric and not in reasoning or of poetry. But an enunciative sentence belongs to the present theory. The enunciative sentence belongs to the present theory. So Aristotle here at the end of chapter 4 has brought us to the point where we now have the subject in view. On interpretation is the study of the enunciative sentence. That's the topic of Aristotle's work on interpretation. We started by learning about the parts of sentences. We then learned about the genus of sentence in general. That's what the word. That's where the word general comes from. It comes from genus. We learned about sentences in general. That any sentence is a voice that is significant according to compact, of which parts may be significant separately. So we learned about the sentence in general, and now we've divided sentences to focus on one specific kind of sentence, which is enunciative. And Aristotle now says the enunciative sentence belongs to the present theory. That's what we're interested in. Okay, so at the end of chapter 4, we've zeroed in on the subject of on interpretation. All right. And you can see in chapter 5, we're going to now start getting into the actual stuff of this book on interpretation. But Aristotle has led us to the point where we have a clear understanding of the subject of this study. And that wraps up chapter 4. So I hope that that's clear and helpful as you make your first reading. What I would recommend you do, because now you have a good overview of where this study is heading, I'd like you now to go back and reread chapters 1, 2, and 3. And you'll see they make a lot more sense in light of chapter 4. And that's how we have to study Aristotle. That's how it works. It's a constant cyclical reading where we allow all of the works to inform our understanding of each of the works. All of the chapters to understand each of the chapters. We let Aristotle interpret Aristotle for us. Okay, so study chapter 4, master the content of this lesson, but go back and reread chapters 1, 2, and 3, and you'll see it beginning to become much more clear as we continue through this book. And we'll just keep doing that as we go on studying Aristotle. So I hope that's helpful. In chapter 4, we have the definition of a sentence, an explanation of how a sentence is like the parts of a sentence, how it's like nouns and verbs, but more importantly, how it's different from nouns and verbs, because part of it may be significant. We learned how sentence as a genus divides into different kinds of sentences, that all of them are insignificant to us except for one, the enunciative sentence. We've defined an enunciative sentence here, and we're now ready to dig in to our study on interpretation. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.